father had pressed it into his palm the morning of the wedding, a cream envelope sealed with wax, his father's initials pressed into it with the family ring that now sat in Marcus's nightstand drawer. "You won't need it," his father had said, gripping his shoulder with both hands, the way he used to when Marcus was small and needed steadying. "But if the night ever comes when she breaks you, I mean all the way down, not just hurt, but broken, you open it then, not before." Marcus had laughed, because who receives a warning at their own wedding and takes it seriously? He was 31 years old and certain, and in love with a woman who looked at him like he was the answer to something she had been working out for years. The world knew Marcus Ellison as a man who drove a 10-year-old Silverado with a dent above the rear wheel well and wore the same 4 pairs of work boots in rotation. He was a site superintendent for a mid-tier residential contractor in Cabarrus County, North Carolina. The kind of man who showed up at job sites before sunrise and left after the last crew member. Her friends, and they were always her friends, never theirs, called him Steady Marcus. The way they said it, it was not a compliment. She never corrected them. It was easier to let people believe what they saw. What his wife Camille did not know, what she had never once thought to ask in 11 years of marriage, was what Marcus had been doing every third Saturday of every month when he drove. 3 hours down to Greenville and came back quieter and fuller at the same time. Last night, sitting alone in the kitchen of the house he had built with his own hands on land his father left him, Marcus Ellison had opened the letter. What it contained would cost Camille Ellison every dollar she had spent 3 years engineering to take from him. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The coffee was still hot when Marcus came in from checking the north fence line at 6:15 that Tuesday morning in early October. The land was quiet the way Carolina land goes quiet before the cold arrives, still watching, holding its breath. He set the thermos on the soapstone counter he had poured himself and stood at the window watching the tree line where the deer had been working through the boundary for the past 2 weeks. The house had taken 4 years to complete, not because it was large, though it was, farmhouse-style 2-story with a wraparound porch, 4 bedrooms and a workshop behind the main structure that his neighbors sometimes mistook for a separate home. But because Marcus had insisted on doing every meaningful piece himself, he had framed it with his own crew on weekends. He had laid the floors in hickory he had sourced from a mill in Salisbury. He had run the electrical rough-in with a licensed friend from his apprenticeship days. He had tiled the kitchen and both bathrooms with his own hands, using patterns his father had shown him when Marcus was 12 years old and his father was still young enough to kneel on concrete for 4 hours without complaint. His father had told him once, "A man who can build what he lives in will never be at the mercy of what someone else builds him." Marcus had not understood it at 12. He had understood it at 26, when the first contractor he worked for cheated 3 families out of their earnest money and walked away clean. Marcus had walked away from the company with his license, his tools, and a clear list of everything he would never do to another person. Camille came downstairs at 7:15, already dressed for work. She was a marketing director at a healthcare group in Charlotte, a role she had earned and a position she was proud of. In the way people are proud of things they believe define them. She kissed his cheek in the practiced way a person kisses something they no longer truly see. Her perfume was different, the amber one he had bought her for 7 consecutive anniversaries, the one she had always said she loved. This was lighter, cooler, something he did not recognize, and she had not mentioned purchasing. He noticed it without saying anything. The way he noticed everything, filing it beside the other details he had been collecting since August. "You're up early," she said. It was not really a question. Fence post on the north side. Deer got into the post hole again. She was already looking at her phone, scrolling in the way that meant she had left the room even while still standing in it. Marcus had met Camille Simmons 9 years before they married. Church cookout his aunt had dragged him to, on a Saturday. He had planned to spend sanding a credenza in the shop. She had been standing near the folding tables, arguing with great confidence about the correct proportion of vinegar in a mustard-based barbecue sauce. He had walked over and agreed with her, because she was right, and she had looked at him with an amused, appraising look and said, "You actually know something about that." He had said, "I know a lot of things about a lot of things." She had laughed. He had never stopped wanting to make her laugh from that moment until, quite recently, until somewhere around the time the amber perfume disappeared and a cooler one he did not recognize took its place. He had proposed to her on this very land, before the house was built, standing in the field where the porch now was. She had cried and said yes, and they had stood in the September late light, and he had believed completely. This was the shape his life was supposed to take. His phone buzzed on the counter, not the phone Camille knew about. The other one, sleeker, newer, registered to a business address in Greenville, that lived in the breast pocket of his barn jacket, unknown to her, as it had always been. He glanced at the screen. The message was from a contact he had labeled Donnell, which was not a code name but a reminder, the name of his father's oldest friend, and a man who had taught Marcus to read a room before he could read. Balance sheet. The message read, "It moved again. Same account. She doesn't know we're watching." Marcus set the phone face down on the soapstone counter. He heard Camille's car in the drive at 7:40. He did not go to the window to watch it leave. He already knew the shape of what was coming. The first time Marcus saw evidence of what Camille had been doing, it was not dramatic. It was a Wednesday evening in early August, 7 weeks before that October morning. He had come in through the workshop entrance and set his bag on the mudroom bench without announcing himself, which he sometimes did when he needed to decompress before entering the house proper. He heard her voice from the kitchen, low, careful, the particular register a person uses when they are performing privacy, not hiding, exactly, but arranging the acoustics of the room around themselves. "It's not enough," she said. "We talked about what enough looks like. You know what I need before the end of the year." A pause. "He won't even notice until it's already done. That's the whole point." Another pause. Then the sound of heels on hardwood moving toward the front of the house. Marcus stood in the mudroom. He did not move for a moment. His face registered nothing at all. Then he went to the kitchen and started a pot of coffee. He did not ask Camille what the call had been about. What he did instead was go to his study after she was asleep and open the shared household account for the first time in months. He had given Camille the day-to-day management of it when they first moved in, which had seemed reasonable, and which had in fact been precisely what she had needed it to seem. Pulled the last 14 months of statements and laid them across his desk. His hands did not shake. His face remained perfectly calm. He moved with the same deliberate calm that defined all his actions. What he found was not chaos. It was architecture. 17 transfers, each in amounts between $800 and $3,300, each one separated by a gap, just long enough to avoid drawing flags, each one moving into an account he did not recognize. He added them across the rows with the focused attention of a man who had spent 20 years reading structural calculations and never once let an error pass. $38,200. He went back further. He opened the equity line statements, which were accessible through the same portal. There was a draw 11 months ago, $12,000, completed under a routine maintenance authorization that Camille had processed without telling him. He had approved the account structure years earlier and never reviewed the draw history. He was reviewing it now. The total was $50,000 and some change. He photographed each page with his secondary phone. He forwarded every statement to a private email address he maintained under a separate name. He created a folder on the encrypted drive in his filing cabinet and labeled it simply "Before." He sat with the numbers a long time. Pattern behind them was not impulsive. 17 careful moves over 14 months, each time to avoid notice, each building toward a total that would give her something to land on when she was ready to go. She had been planning this while kissing his cheek in the mornings, while asking about his job sites, while lying in the bed he had built for the room he had framed with his own hands. He thought about the sealed letter in the kitchen drawer. Not yet, he told himself. He made one phone call to a number in Greenville. He opened a second folder on the encrypted drive and named it. After, he picked up the photograph from the credenza, the two of them on the land before the house was built, standing in the field where the porch now was, and he set it face down, not out of anger. Out of documentation because he was a builder, builders kept the records that proved what they built was sound. 3 days later, Marcus sat across from Patricia Okafor in a leather chair on the 14th floor of a building in uptown Charlotte. Patricia was 61, family law and asset recovery attorney, referred to Marcus by a man in the construction industry, whose ex-wife had attempted to redirect a 6-figure operating account. Patricia had a still, watchful quality that Marcus recognized, the quality of someone who processed information completely before deciding what to do with it. She looked at the folder he placed on her desk. "Walk me through what you know," she said. He did, slowly, without emotion. When he finished, Patricia made 3 more notes on her legal pad and looked at him. "The transfer pattern, if we can establish the receiving account is in her name or under a third party she controls, is potentially fraudulent dissipation of marital assets," she said. "North Carolina courts take documented dissipation very seriously in equitable distribution proceedings." She set her pen down. "I need to ask about your own assets before we proceed." "I know," Marcus said. He told her about Greenville. He told her about the property trust, the investment portfolio, the LLC that held 3 residential rental units in Rock Hill and 2 commercial properties in Concord that he had been acquiring quietly since his late 20s, each purchase documented, each holding properly registered and maintained. He told her the current balance, $412,000 in liquid and near-liquid assets, held entirely in structures established before his marriage, documented with the care his father had taught him from the time Marcus earned his first real check. Patricia was quiet for a moment. "She does not know any of this exists," she said. "No," Marcus said. "She thinks she is leaving a man who drives an old truck and manages job sites." Something settled in Patricia's expression that was not quite a smile but occupied the same space. "Mr. Ellison," she said, "think we're going to be just fine." Real power operated in quiet rooms. The following Saturday, Marcus drove to Greenville, as he had done every 3rd Saturday for years. His father's oldest friend, Donnell Washington, was 74 now and moved slower than he used to, but his mind was a precision instrument that age had only sharpened. They sat on Donnell's back porch with sweet tea and the sound of his wife's gospel music drifting through the screen door, and Marcus told him everything. Donnell listened without interrupting. When Marcus finished, he was quiet a long time. "She ever asked about your father's holdings," Donnell said. "Twice. Both times I told her. It had all been settled into the family trust, and there wasn't much there. She believed it because she believed what she saw." "She was looking at the truck," Marcus said. Donnell nodded slowly. "I know the man she's been moving money toward. He's been in 3 bad financial situations in the last 6 years, 1 civil judgment, 1 settled out of court, 1 that just disappeared. Careful people don't get into 3 situations in 6 years. Patricia's people already found the civil judgment," Marcus said. "Then you have what you need." Donnell was quiet for a moment. "Your father used to say that preparation is the work. The patience is just what preparation looks like from the outside." That evening Marcus drove back, but not directly home. He stopped at the small Baptist church 2 miles past his property. Horniatras had been buried 5 years prior. He stood at the marker in the early dark for a while. He did not say anything. He just stood there in the way that sometimes, when there is no one left who has known you the longest, The best you can do is stand in the same ground with them, and let the quiet carry what cannot be said aloud. That night, he sat across from Camille at the dinner table, and passed the rolls, and answered her questions about the Harrisburg job site and listened to her describe a conference in Raleigh the following weekend. He watched the practiced ease of her performance. He ate his food. He thanked her for cooking. He washed his own plate. He was watching. He had always been watching. 3 days before the Raleigh conference, Patricia called. Her financial investigator had identified the receiving account, held under a shell company whose registered agent was a man named Gerald Fitch. Gerald Fitch had a civil judgment for $44,000 from a partnership dispute in Mecklenburg County filed 4 years prior. Gerald Fitch also had a notarized personal guarantee on a small business loan, co-signed by Camille Ellison, dated 8 months before the first transfer from the household account. The document had been filed with the County Register of Deeds as a lien instrument, public record, simply never searched. The total picture: $62,000 in documented asset movement, co-signed guarantee that legally entangled Camille in Fitch's prior civil liabilities, 14-month pattern that supported a finding of dissipation in contemplation of separation under North Carolina statute. She planned to file right after the conference, Patricia said. My guess is she intended to come back as the woman leaving, not the woman being left. She wanted to move first. Can we move before she does? Marcus asked. I filed the complaint this morning, Patricia said. That night, Marcus went to the kitchen drawer and took out the letter. He sat at the soapstone counter. His father had helped him learn to work. He turned the cream envelope over in his hands. The wax seal was still intact, his father's initials still clear. He thought about the morning of his wedding, his father's hands on both shoulders, the specific weight of love being handed down alongside a warning. He opened the letter. His father's handwriting, small, deliberate, the handwriting of a man who measured everything twice, covered both sides of a single folded sheet. The first paragraph was about Marcus's grandfather, who had lost a hardware business and his house to a woman who spent 2 years planning her exit while accepting his care. The second paragraph was about Marcus's uncle, which Donnell had referenced, without knowing Marcus's father had already written it down. The third paragraph was about the nature of cold architectural betrayal, the kind that required sustained effort and the deliberate wearing of a face that was not your own, and how to recognize it only when you had already built your response. The final paragraph read, If you've opened this, you already know what you're dealing with. You know because I raised you to observe before you speak and document before you act. Trust what you've already gathered. The work is done. What's left is simply the delivery. You built the house. You know how it stands. Walk out of the room with your head level and let the structure speak. I love you, son. I am proud of you every single day. Marcus read it twice. He folded it carefully and returned it to the envelope. Then he placed it in the inner pocket of his barn jacket, against his chest where it stayed. He was done. The meeting happened on a Thursday morning in Patricia's conference room, 14 floors above the city. Camille arrived with a younger attorney and the composed expression of someone who had rehearsed the scene. She walked in, found Marcus already seated, calm, with Patricia beside him, and 3 organized folders on the table in front of them. Something shifted in her face, subtle and complete, like a door closing behind the eyes. Patricia let Camille's attorney finish his opening outline of the petition. Irreconcilable differences. Marital estate described in the terms Camille had provided. The Cabarrus County property. The joint account. The equity line. Patricia set the first folder on the table and began. 17 transfers, $38,200. A shell company. Gerald Fitch, the equity draw, the notarized guarantee predating the first transfer by 8 months. Filed with the Register of Deeds, public record. Camille's attorney was no longer arranging his papers. He was reading. There is a third folder, Patricia said, containing a summary of Mr. Ellison's separate property, assets held in a properly documented trust and LLC structure, acquired entirely prior to the marriage and maintained accordingly. The figure was on the first page. Camille leaned toward her attorney and read it. The change in her expression was not dramatic. It was the change of a person doing arithmetic and arriving at an answer they had never once prepared. For $412,000. Separate property, not subject to distribution. Her attorney leaned close and spoke quietly. Her hands moved from the table to her lap. Marcus. Her voice was measured and soft and directed at the version of him she had believed she understood for 11 years. We don't have to do this like this. This is us. We can. No, said a voice from the doorway. His Aunt Vivian had been sitting in the waiting area at Patricia's request, and she walked in now and took the chair at the end of the table. She was 66 years old and had the bearing of a woman who had long since stopped allocating energy to things that did not deserve it. You don't get to say us to that man, Vivian said. Not after what you did to his accounts for 14 months. You don't get to use his name like a tool now that yours stopped working. Camille's attorney placed a brief, professional hand on her forearm. Marcus stood. He buttoned his jacket. I built that house for someone who was already planning to strip it down and leave, he said. His voice was level and quiet. I know how to build things that last. That's what I do. You pick the wrong man to build against. He looked at her steadily, without anger, without satisfaction. What you built won't last. It never had the right foundation. It's always been the difference between us. He nodded to Patricia. He nodded to Vivian. He walked to the door. He did not look back. The elevator was waiting. He touched his father's letter once through the fabric of his jacket as the doors closed. He thought about his father's handwriting. Small and deliberate, measuring twice before every word. He thought about the field where the porch now was, and the September light, and the woman who had said yes and meant it, and then spent years methodically becoming someone else. She had been looking at the truck the whole time. She had never once thought to look at what he had built underneath. 6 months had passed like water under a bridge he had already crossed when Marcus Ellison stood in his greenhouse at 7 in the morning, pressing tomato seedlings into dark soil with the careful, practiced motion of a man who understood that growth required patience and the right conditions. And nothing more complicated than that. The greenhouse was new, a post and beam structure, cedar and glass, his own design, built on a long weekend in February with 2 old friends from the trades and an unhurried afternoon. It smelled of soil and green things, and the particular quiet of early morning he had been rebuilding since October. A woman named Renee came through the back door of the main house and across the yard with 2 mugs of coffee. She was 41, a structural engineer with a Charlotte firm, who Marcus had worked alongside on a commercial project in Concord for the better part of a year. She had asked good questions the first time they met and had never once performed for him. She handed him a mug and stood beside him, looking at the rows of seedlings. How long until they produce? She asked. 8 weeks if the light cooperates, he said, and if it doesn't, 10. Either way they produce. He glanced at her. That's the thing about tomatoes. Give them the right conditions, and they do what they're supposed to do. The equitable distribution had been finalized in late January. The court found in full for Marcus's dissipation claim and awarded him a credit that returned the entirety of what had been moved from the household. Count. His separately held assets remained entirely outside the marital estate. The house and land, titled solely in his name under the original purchase, were not subject to distribution. Camille had taken her share of the joint account, the furnishings she had chosen, and nothing more. He had heard the rest through a cousin, who had stayed in contact with people from Camille's circle. The hearing on the guarantee instrument had not gone well for Gerald Fitch, who faced a judgment that folded directly back into his prior civil matter. Fitch had relocated to Greensboro in March. Camille was now working a marketing coordinator position, not a director role, not in healthcare, at a mid-size agency in Ballantyne. Her industry contacts, many of whom knew Marcus through the construction community, had grown quiet around her. Her mother had stopped returning her calls, which Marcus learned only because Camille's mother had called him directly in February. Not quite an apology, but the kind of thing older women sometimes say when they are too proud for the direct version. He had been kind to her, cost him nothing. Marcus set his mug on the cedar bench and continued pressing seedlings into soil, row by row, with the same steady patience that had defined everything he had done since that August evening in the mudroom, when he had stood still, listened, understood, and begun. He thought about his father's letter. It lived now in the small cedar box on his nightstand alongside the family ring. He did not read it often. But knowing it was, there was enough. Knowing that his father had seen this possibility coming, had written it down, folded it into a cream envelope with wax, and had handed it to a 31-year-old man on his wedding morning with both hands. The morning light came through the cedar and glass panels and settled on the green rose before him with the patience it had always had, different to what had happened and what had not, moving at its own pace as light does. He had built everything worth keeping. He was free. He was solvent. He was unbothered. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.